We're on the 666th episode of the My Thoughts series. If you add in the podcast and the writing multiverse, since they're also extensions of My Thoughts. But yeah, it's time we talk about this. I thought it was hilarious that I realized I was making 666 on this. You see, what we're talking about is what many people consider to be the greatest graphic novel ever created. And that, of course, is Watchmen by DC Comics, aka Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. This was a very, very difficult thing. Like, I've been trying to delay the inevitable talking about this because I had finished reading it during my time in Colorado, but I always had a hard time trying to say, like, what can I say? What can I say about this that probably no one, but that pretty much everyone else hasn't already said? Like, everything about it is considered great. The artwork, the story, the characters, all about it was great. But I always try to figure out, what can I say? What can I say about this? Like, I really love this. I don't hate it. Like, if I hated it, that would have been a different review. That would have been a different thoughts video about my opinions on this. But I kept loving it. Like, when I first discovered this book, it was actually when I was a teenager, and I couldn't really read it. Not because of the horrendous, grotesque imagery, the blood, the violence, the disturbing stuff they put in here. No. Why I couldn't read it is because it's a very slow-paced book. It's a 12-issue series where basically they go and show this alternate world where there are superheroes, only one has superpowers, that is basically mirroring our world, but the big divergence is the year 1938, where heroes exist, and it's caused a huge change in history, like the Vietnam War being won by the United States, Richard Nixon being elected to a third term, yeah, and only one powerful superhero is the omnipresent yet emotionless Dr. Manhattan. And basically, the Watergate scandal doesn't happen, and the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan occurs approximately 6 years later than in real life. So, yeah, here's the thing. The Cold War is going on. There's a huge amount of tension, since Dr. Manhattan's mere existence has given the U.S. a strategic advantage over the Soviet Union, which has caused more tension. And here's the thing I always kept wondering regarding when it comes to Dr. Manhattan, especially when they give the origin story about how he was created in this horrendous lab accident. This has always been something that bugged me when I look back on it. I was like, wait, why don't... Well, for one, if they somehow managed to pull off creating God, then how did they ever fail again? And secondly, this is a more shadier, darker version of the United States government. You would think that realizing, oh my god, we made a god. Okay, let's replicate this miracle multiple times and then make an army of our own Dr. Manhattans and rule the world. That just bugged me. Like, yeah... You would think a corrupt government that has so much power and influence in the world would build an army of Dr. Manhattans by replicating the accident that made him. And, yeah, and I don't recall if there was a moment where they said they destroyed it or something because it was considered a failure or something. Like, clearly that's not the case since Ozymandias has one. There is one thing I don't like. I don't like when Ozymandias gets all jovial and happy, knowing, like, when he says, I did it. I did it! Yes! I killed 3 million people in the name of peace! Wait. Yeah, that just always bugged me. Like, dude, you killed 3 million people. Like, the first time you said I did with a tear in your eye, maybe you felt remorse knowing what you did, but knowing it had to be done in your eyes, but you're being all celebrating, and this is the coolest for celebration, knowing I just murdered 3 million people. And, yeah. That happens at the end. I like how they go ahead and have him say that, what, did you think I'm some comic book villain that goes in and sprouts my plan and then just expects you to try and stop me? Oh, fuck that. I did that 30 minutes ago. Yeah. Also, Rorschach's is awesome. I don't necessarily agree with his philosophy, since he's a very far-right individual and he has a viewpoint of never compromising, which I can respect on his non-compromising ideology. But, yeah, I knew, yeah, he's dead. Like, clearly this is building up where he's gonna die, right? Yeah, the reason why I was always hesitant to read this wasn't because of all this. It was because the pacing is very slow build. Like I said, it's a 12-issue series, and I just kept wondering, am I reading a superhero comic book? Yeah, here's the thing. I've said this in my Star Wars comic video regarding Legacy Volume 1. I loved Star Wars comic books more than I loved DC or Marvel's comic books when it was the Dark Horse era, because Marvel and DC didn't have something that Star Wars comics did, or Star Wars in general. It had something called the passage of time, as in the characters grew older as time went on in their universe. They grew, they changed with time. So, yeah. Whereas in Marvel and DC, their age is stuck at a particular point. Except for Watchmen, there is more realism, since they try to keep this as real as possible. But, yeah, like, they thought that... Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons thought they had enough plot for only 6 issues, which, like, maybe, if they cut a lot of stuff out. But the idea of going ahead and say this is going to be a 6-issue series now, it would be crazy. In fact, originally, Rorschach wasn't planned to die until chapter 4. Yeah, originally, they went ahead, like it was said, Alan Moore found out that realizing that what he made with Rorschach, he realized, yeah, he has to die. He's a guy who doesn't compromise, and he realized this in the 4th issue, which made me curious about how was this originally going to end? Was everyone going to live, and Rorschach going to give up on his beliefs? Nah, I don't know. Also, the Rorschach's journal thing, I really enjoyed it. I really loved how it was telling within the story. And then you got this internal comic called The Tales of the Black Freighter, which shows this whole hinting of how the ending is going to be. And I really love the 9-panel layout, the 3x3 structure style they do. I actually do love that. I really wish I could see more of it. They've been doing it more in DC Rebirth storylines since they got to connect Watchmen with the DC universe, so give it what you will on that. But, yeah, and a lot of the characters I've said were really phenomenal. I really loved all of them. Like, though, really, in a realistic point of view, I actually should hate them because most of them are either horrible people, morally damaged, psychologically crazy, the comedian, and one is an apathetic whatever who likes to showcase his privates on certain occasions, like it means no big deal to him, and yeah, and only wears his suit when he has to do something quote professional, even though he's not really caring, he's apathetic. But there were a lot of memorable lines from Dr. Manhattan, and yeah, like I really enjoyed the line where he says that everything is preordained. We're all puppets, Laurie. I'm just a puppet who can see the strings. And how he says time, how he can see through the past, present, and future, like it's just one big continual loop. Like he can see all of it at a non-linear rate, like normal people can. So it leads to this interesting thing, like he knows everything. He knows from the beginning, the middle, and the end. He's witnessing it all at once, which does lead to questions of how the hell did the comedian survive. Like I have reasons to believe Dr. Manhattan like duplicated him, copied his soul, and brought it into the DC universe with a physical body, and that's my best guess. But yeah, so Also, when we get to that moment where we learn more about Dr. Manhattan's character and how he came to become Dr. Manhattan, I really loved it, and also see the tragedy in it. Like, he's become this omnipresent being who's losing more and more connection with humanity until he starts cheating on his first lover, and then all hell breaks loose. And then the cancer stuff comes in, and he's unknown about that. But yeah, and when they revealed Ozymandias was behind all this, I thought it was kind of interesting. But I always kept thinking to myself, Rorschach has to die, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm against it, but he's kind of cool. But yeah, like, involving this whole storyline where basically there's this killer trying to kill people in masks, and how we get more backstory about the Watchmen, about why things fell apart for them, why it was illegal, why they're sanctioned by, why the comedian and Dr. Manhattan are sanctioned by the U.S. government because they're official quote government agents, whereas guys like Night Owl, Ozymandias are not heroes anymore. Whereas Ozymandias took his fame as a hero and turned it into a philanthropist business and a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. Yeah, the only one who was actively doing stuff was Walter Kovacs, aka Rorschach, who has a very tragic backstory. And the comedian is killed off, like, right at the second he shows up in the flashback sequences. Though it turns out he's not, because a copy of him is in the DC universe, currently strapped to a chair at the time of this video, and currently being tortured at the hands of Mime and Marionette, while Mime holds the Green Lantern, where Marionette holds the Green Lantern battery of Alan Scott, because Dr. Manhattan's kind of a dick. But yeah, yeah. So, I always loved these, and we also get these psych profiles and information, background lore to show what happened. Like, where's the Minutemen? Where are the original Watchmen group? Like, they had to be somewhere, right? And then we find out that some of them are either dead, others are in a mental hospital, some are retired. That's basically the gist of it. Like, some died like nobody, some died in accidents, some died trying to be a hero but failed miserably. Like, basically the vibe that even though you're a superhero, so to speak, a costume adventurer, you're kind of a nobody next to, like, you know, the rest of the world. Like, you're just a guy in a mask. And you're not an official government. And, yeah. It also goes into this hinting by, like, in flashbacks, the comedian alludes to having assassinated Woodward, and, whatever this other guy's name, encouraged the repeal of the 22nd Amendment involving the removal of presidential terms and whatnot, whereas Richard Nixon goes ahead and gets a, fifth term. Like, the comedian assassinating certain characters, like in the Watchmen movie, it's shown that he killed John F. Kennedy. So that's going to be a big conspiracy theory now. So, yeah. Also, I like how we see these secondary characters go ahead and interact and whatnot, and try to decipher this basically going over this Tales of the Black Freighter. Like, I really like how these two interact, the owner of the small little store and the teenager. I just really liked it for some reason. I just can't help it. There's a charm to it. And then when you see them at the end, when we get the giant squid monster rigging a massive psych blast, they're hugging, like they're thinking he's going to protect him, and we all know that's not going to end greatly. And yeah, I want to praise more of Rorschach because he gets because the story's like he's like kind of the first person narrator, so to speak. He only sees what we see, but we also get insights into other stuff and get some third person omniscient narrating. But like, I always enjoyed some of the sequences we got with Rorschach, like how there's the whole psych profile thing with Blake, with not with Blake, with Reggie Long's dad, and we all know how that ended up, like how Reggie Long's dad went ahead and became more and more desensitized, so to speak, with the world, and caused his marriage to fall apart, and Reggie never knew this, and as we know in Doomsday Clock, he's kind of abnormally pissed about this. But, yeah. And when you see the comedian go ahead and show this scene where he's talking with Mothman, how in the flashback sequence, how he's all despairing and whatnot, like, I keep thinking, like, is he feeling guilty for all the horrible things he's done? Like, that would be interesting character development for a guy who got killed off. But it is interesting that maybe he feels a shred of remorse for what he's done. Like, he sees the world as one big joke. Not like the Joker. That's a different metaphor for him. But, like, whereas Joker is an agent of chaos, the comedian is kind of an agent of chaos, but at the same time he just sees, this is the world, so I'm just going to laugh at it. So, yeah. And then we learn about Laurie's character, how she has to accept the fact that Blake is her father, who had tried to sexually assault his mother, her mother, and then they had a second relationship. I don't know why. Yeah, I just still do not figure out why she would go back to the person who tried to horrendously sexually assault her. But yeah. But yeah, I feel like this is the only way I'm explaining Watchmen to myself, as in a way to just ramble in places and go out of sync with this. But I loved how it ends ambiguously when you get this ending when Rorschach's journal is in the New Frontiersman, a far right-wing magazine, and the final page shows editor contemplating which item from the Crank to which Kovac's journal is in to use as filler for the upcoming issue because the world's at peace and there's not really much anything to do. The final line of the story is that the editor's superior, indifferent as to which piece from the Crank file is selected, he tells the editor, he tells him this: I leave it entirely in your hands. I knew for a fact what this ending was basically hinting at. Basically, once that journal is revealed and is revealed to the public, humanity has a choice. Either accept a peace, but know that 3 million people were dead because one guy, and you could arrest him and go out about this peaceful plan you have, or descend back into chaos. And according to DC and Doomsday Clock, they decided to go back into animalistic chaos. So, yeah, that plan failed miserably. Though, the question I'm just wondering is, why did this take, 6 or so years for everything to go to hell? Yeah, that's the thing that always bugged me. Like, why did this take 6 years in the Doomsday Clock timeline for things to go to hell? Like, you would think that the journal would be immediately published after some extensive research, but I don't know if it would have taken 6 years to basically see the wording of Adrian Veidt is behind all this and whatnot. But yeah, and like I said, Watchmen is a phenomenal book. I'd be amazed if no one has read it, like probably those who weren't really comic book fans and wasn't really interested in it. But I get the feeling like if you told a person who's not a comic book fan, said, hey, do you know any graphic novels or comic books you can recommend? And they'll probably say, I never read them, but I keep hearing The Watchmen, because that's one of the more famous books out of it. And in fact, Lynn Carr even joked once about how DC tends to remember The Watchmen, The Killing Joke, and The Dark Knight Returns. Okay. Yeah, I can probably buy that since they kept bringing back Frank Miller after what happened with Holy Terror. And Watchmen, I'm surprised. Alan Moore had said that he had an idea for a prequel story, and DC wanted him to do a sequel and a prequel storyline. Alan Moore didn't agree to those terms. And then DC came back and said, look, we'll give you back the license, just make a prequel and a sequel. And Alan Moore basically told him to get fucked. And they went ahead and made the Before Watchmen stories, which I might cover one day if I ever get my hands on some. but no idea right now. And then there's the whole Doomsday Clock story, and that was a little difficult at times. Like, I'm not saying I don't know if Alan Moore would approve of it. I like Doomsday Clock as an unauthorized sequel, but I'm pretty certain Alan Moore doesn't like it because it wasn't what he envisioned. But because he knows DC is going to go ahead and try and make as much money as possible off the Watchmen name, they're going to do it. Like Dave Gibbons, he was more forgiving about the whole issue because he was like, he's open for new writers and creators to try and expand the scope of the Watchmen universe. No idea how he feels about Doomsday Clock. So, yeah. This is a great story, and I love how it ends with the whole, nothing ever ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends. In the end, and whatnot. And, yeah, that was... And when Dr. Manhattan goes ahead, and he says basically his goodbyes to Adrian, when Adrian Veidt says, I did do the right thing, right? In the end, it all worked out. In the end, Hadrian Veidt, nothing ever ends. Nothing ever ends. He then went off to create the worst reboot in the history of DC Comics and the history of media in general, until Disney said, hold my beer, and rebooted Star Wars Expanded Universe material. And we all know how that worked out with people, right? So, yeah. As you can tell, I really kind of don't like the reboot of Star Wars to an extent. Like, I'm open to a new canon, but I'm open to an alternative timeline. But that's besides the point. Watchmen was a great story, still is. Let's see if Jeff Johns can fully make a coming full circle. Try to see if he can make Doomsday Clock be on the level, since we're already past the halfway mark at the time of this video. So let's see how Doomsday Clock fares in the coming months, as they do a bi-monthly release, because they do that. So we'll wait and see about that. So those were my thoughts on Watchmen. This was Neo Reality Entertainment. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and donate.